Matt Whitaker, former U.S. Acting Attorney General.
This is such a great conversation about America, our future, what's going to save our republic.
We have a great football player. Matt Whitaker is here. Matt.
They tried to bury me. They didn't realize I was a seed.
It's a touchdown, Whitaker.
Former acting U.S. Attorney General.
Under President Trump.
I'm going to be an unwavering supporter of law enforcement.
Welcome to Liberty and Justice with your host, Matt Whitaker.
All right, welcome to Liberty and Justice. I'm your host, Matt Whitaker. I've taken a couple of weeks off. I know all of my loyal folks have been wondering what the plan is, but it's been a reload, recharge, and a chance to really get some rock star guests. And the first rock star guest is my friend David Bernhardt, former Secretary of the Interior, wrote this great book, You Report to Me. We're going to get into that. I'll make sure I link all the things on the show notes so that you can get your copy. But Secretary, good to see you, my friend.
Hey, thanks for having me, Matt. I'm thrilled to be here and look forward to the conversation.
Yeah, we were, because, we see each other at a lot of events and we're both involved heavily in America First Policy Institute. We were just talking, just talking about the news of the day and what's going on. But, I think we can either take this broad or we can take it deep. But I think the first thing that I want to get into is just sort of your, this book, You Report to Me. Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, look, both of you and I had a wonderful experience of having a chance to work with a president who really wanted to drive change, and to be part of that was, at least at the Department of the Interior, was really, really special. I served in two administrations. Like you, I served in the Bush administration and then in the Trump administration, and having an opportunity to work directly with the president was a very different experience than my experience in the Bush White House, where there were just layers of effort between a cabinet secretary and the president himself. And so the book's title, You Report to Me, is really an indication of the experience I had working with the president directly. But more broadly, what the book really focuses on is my concern about the broad failure of the accountability within the administrative state. And when I talk about that, what I'm really talking about is we have 2.2 million civil servants, and many of whom are dedicated and are doing everything they can for the country. But there are some, and my experience that are not. And my experience with the Trump administration really was, from day one, was an indication that it was going to be acceptable to really push back against the policies of the administration internally. And that was very, frankly, quite different than my experience in the Bush administration, where folks would just simply maybe not work 100% or push, but you could work around them. And so I try and highlight that in the book, that experience, but then more broadly talk about why that exists. And my theory, and everybody can have their own theory, but my real thinking on this is that Congress over time has passed very, very broad laws. The government has grown immensely on the federal executive branch side. And because of those two things, policymakers have delegated most of their responsibility and authority down in agencies. And in doing that, there's very little accountability for those decisions. And then over time, the courts, as you know, with deference doctrines like Chevron, have really tried to accommodate the executive branch's activities. And in doing that, I really believe executive agencies generally, maybe not the Department of Justice where you were at, but certainly policy agencies that are tasked with specific laws that Congress has passed, have become more and more and more aggressive at trying to stretch the boundaries of the law to accomplish whatever they wanted to do. And in doing that, we've really gotten out of kilter. And I think the only way to begin to correct that is, number one, the courts need to be a little more circumspect. And I think with the new Supreme Court, we're headed that direction positively. But more importantly and more effectively, leaders of these agencies need to be willing to take the mantle of supervision seriously and hold their employees accountable, and more importantly, be willing to make the decisions themselves and be held accountable for those decisions. And in doing that, I believe we can restore a important balance of power. And the reason I say that is because if we have a bureaucracy that is allowed to simply ignore the policy vision of whatever president is elected, we're really taking away the ability of the American people to influence the policy of the federal government. And I think that's frankly very scary.
Yeah, and I think we're closer to that in some regards than one might imagine, just because it is so big. If you think about, for example, the Department of Interior or the Department of Justice, at the Department of Justice, we had about 120,000 employees. 30 to 40,000 of those are in the FBI. Another 20 to 30,000 in the Bureau of Prisons. But it spreads out to ATF, DEA, right, U.S. Marshals, U.S. Attorney's offices. I mean, there's a lot happening, just like your department and others, that is very hard to manage the minutia of it. And so you set, broad policies. I remember, for example, the famous Ashcroft memo, which said you had, simply you need to charge the most readily provable offense. Very simple. You need to investigate and then charge. And yet we now, and Sessions came out with a similar memo. And I don't think, and I don't believe, because that's sort of the essence of federal prosecution in the first place. I don't think that the Biden administration rolled that back. Maybe they did. I don't believe they did. But, it's a fundamental tenet of how we do law enforcement in the federal system. And, you look at this Hunter Biden news that just broke this week, and it's very clear to me that they're not charging the most readily provable offense. They possibly allowed some statutes of limitation to run of the most serious offenses. He's getting an agreement, a diversion agreement that, to me, I can barely scratch my head on that, on such a serious, gun charge. But, you're right. It is hard to inculcate and continue to drive, because you'll say a policy, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. And then you sort of go on to the next thing. It's oftentimes kind of triage, whatever's bleeding and screaming the most you deal with. And so it's hard to stay on top of all of the, president's policy prerogatives that, that each of us were charged to do in the administration. But, I think that, this book is, I think, a really good recommendation. But, does it, by the title, sometimes the titles and the contents, don't necessarily line perfectly up, but does it portend or suggest the acknowledgement that there is a deep state and there is, a liberal bias within the, the permanent bureaucratic establishment?
Well, there's no doubt. I mean, if you go back to, what the framers envisioned, it's fascinating. Like, at the end of the first Congress, the State Department had 4 people, a secretary and a couple of clerks, right? And today it has over 15,000. Mm-hmm. And so an agency like DOJ that has 125, or Interior that, depending on the weather, has between 65 and 100. What you have generally government-wide is overall in the federal civil service about 2 Democrat employees for every 1 Republican employee. And then when you get to the senior levels of government, it goes from 2 to 1 to 3 to 1.
Mhm.
And so the higher up you go in the civil service structure, the more ideologically left the agencies tend to be. And different agencies have different cultures. And to be candid, at Interior, where you had eight different agencies, some were actually more conservative and some aren't. But the truth of the matter is, overall, what we've seen is a dramatic leaning left. And the ideology at the end of the day shouldn't matter if they're willing to carry out the policies of any given president. But what we saw in the Trump administration, and what the book really highlights, is not at one agency, but literally at every agency, there was significant pushback on policy initiatives by the president and the president's policy leaders. And the consequence of that is to potentially negate the will of the American people. And so, I think that there were a lot of reasons for that, potentially right out of the box. And we highlight this in the book. The media embraced the notion of quote resistance. The members of Congress advocated sort of a resistance, and so because of that, I think it became acceptable to have this sort of pushback. But that we cannot have that as a society, because if we have it, it entirely defeats the notion of a civil service that is a meritocracy. And so given that, then you have to look at what are the tools that can be put in place to negate that.
So I know, David, one of the things that right at the end of the Trump administration they were working on was this whole idea of a Schedule F. How is that? What was the plan with the Schedule F, and how is that going to work?
Well, the concept was to create greater accountability in the civil service by allowing there to be an opportunity to be more diligent in the placement of individual employees, create more flexibility in reshuffling their duties, et cetera. And it was really a very important effort. And what I'm excited about is, if you look across the board at all of the Republican candidates, they're all talking about key changes to accountability, expanding Schedule F in the next round, moving folks out of Washington, D.C. We at Interior, we moved folks west to create a little better environment for them and for decision making. And there's even folks that are examining whether we should move to at-will employees in the federal government. And I think all of those things are designed with the intention of creating a higher degree of accountability, which will lead, in my opinion, to better outcomes for the American people. And so I think that there's a tremendous number of very positive ideas to explore and reimagine how we can better provide results to the American people and demand accountability. And we try and highlight those items in the book.
Yeah, and you're very experienced and knowledgeable on sort of the founding of America, our history, and where we end up right now. Do you think that it's working, that the great experiment of the United States of America in a representative republic where the people have a voice and have some input, do you think the ordinary citizen feels detached right now from their government, or is it through some of these reforms gonna get better?
I'm very concerned, and that's why I wrote the book. I'm extremely troubled by the notion that that we are in a point of a point of critical mass of determining, as a nation, are we going to be a nation where we have a class of regulators, 2.2 million people, that literally have a degree of hostility to the American people that's concerning to me? Or are we going to be a country that the people decide the government that they want? And I am increasingly concerned that the administrative state is becoming less and less concerned about, are they following the law? Are they following their own regulations? Are they following the policies of the president that was elected? And I highlight those concerns in the book because I believe we've gotten to a point in some agencies that people are deciding to do what they think is the best policy, irrespective of what the law is or what the regulations say. And we cannot have a society that functions and gives people a view that they have a voice if we have a very arbitrary class of people managing this country. I don't think that's what any of us signed up for, and it's very concerning to me. And so that's why I laid out the book, and hopefully some suggestions for moving us forward to a point where we have everybody has a say in the direction that this country is going.
And now we just need to get a copy of this book in the hands of every political appointee in the next administration.
That's right.
To make sure they understand how to do it and what's at stake. Where, look in your crystal ball, where does this all go? I mean, we're heading into an election. The polls suggest that nobody's happy with the candidates that they're being offered, but that is for a while. I don't think a lot of people, think that the best of the best are at the top of the ticket. We could probably argue that all day, but where does it go? We've developed probably a little differently than our founding fathers had expected. The states are weakened. The courts have been, to some extent, become more powerful. And where's it all going? What's it going to take to get to form that more perfect union?
Well, I'm confident that we will get there, and I'm incredibly confident because the one thing I'm certain about in our society is the goodness and the wisdom of the American people and their desire for freedom and representative government. And so I am confident. It may take time, but I am completely confident that we'll eventually get to the right place of ensuring that each of us have a strong voice and ensuring that there's accountability in both the executive branch and the legislative branch. And I cannot, all you have to do is move yourself 50 miles outside of the beltway of Washington, D.C. And what you get is, a full frontal assault of the goodness and the wisdom of the American people. And there is no holding us back. The problem, I think, is that the American people, to a certain extent, are not fully apprised of how challenging the situation is. And when they wake up, and they will, as they wake up, they will move the country. They will demand that the country be moved the right way. But this has taken a while to get there, and I'm very confident that we can head to the right direction. And I think it starts, no matter who's elected on the Republican side of the aisle, I think it starts with the clear direction and leadership saying we're demanding change and putting people in place that will be willing to have the courage to move forward and be effective. And I think that given what we've had over the last few years, there will be a groundswell of support to drive that change. And so I'm confident that we can move in the right direction, Matt.
Yeah, good. Well, we could talk all day. You're such an interesting person with amazing experience and a forward-thinking plan and really ideas for what saves our republic. But let's leave it at that. Again, I'll encourage everybody to go get the book, You Report to Me, by David Bernhardt, former Secretary of the Interior for Donald Trump, and just a really great guy, really thoughtful guy, a person that has dedicated many years to the service of his country. and the idea and ideals of the United States of America. So, David, thank you until we see you again.
Thanks a lot for having me.
All right, my friend.